Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
Remember your children, remember our future, remember.
Indigenous women in Nepal experience increased discrimination, exploitation, and violence, which includes being forcibly displaced from their lands and suffering abuse that is aggravated by racism. Talking to Cultural Survival, Yasso Kanti Bhattachan, an Indigenous women's rights activist, highlights the necessity for the government's intervention. This includes implementing recommendations from the UN Monitoring Committee of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, called CEDAW Committee, enacting constitutional reform and developing gender-responsive policies that empower Indigenous women. Collective action is essential to achieving justice and equality for Indigenous women, ensuring their full participation and access to resources.
I am Yasso Kanti Bhattachan. I belong to Thakali nation. Our ancestral homeland is in Maitang Mustang, Thasang, and I belong to Thakali indigenous peoples, and I am one of the founder member and now advisor to National Indigenous Women Federation, and I am vice chair to National Indigenous Women Forum. All women in the world face gender-based violence, but Indigenous women and girls, Indigenous women with disability face unique forms of violence such as racism, discrimination, exploitation, then other women, sexually assault, abuse, harassment, rape due to land grabbing by the government and the development partners in the name of development, and subsequently displacement or forced eviction from their ancestral land, territory, and resources. Harassment based on racial physical features like chinky eyes, flat nose. They accuse that Indigenous peoples as thick tongue, accent, wearing traditional dress, on traditional food such as roots and tuber. Everyone has human right, but as an Indigenous people, we have a collective right. So our human right and collective rights has been violated in all over the world almost, but Nepal also is not exceptional. So Indigenous women and girls face structural violence, systemic violence, linguistic violence, cultural violence, religious violence. So we face series of violence. And also the traditional practice and cultural norms within Indigenous community in Nepal contribute to or mitigate violence against women in the number of ways. Let me illustrate it from everyday practice of our Thakali community. Violation against women do not happen in our ancestral land, but gender-based violence could be found among those Thakalis who have adopted Hindu culture and religion along with patriarchy. Traditionally, any type of violence or crime are prevalent because of collective ways of life for a number of reasons. All community members known as other very well and extended their help and support to one another. Any problem is discussed collectively by their customary self-governance system, and restorative justice is being practiced. Thakali women are decision makers and economically empowered. Even today, all community members seek justice from customary self-governance system. Traditionally, concept of gender is absent. Traditionally, Thakali had no concept of women in laws, including father-in-laws, mother-in-laws, daughter-in-laws, because of cross-cousin marriage and interconnectedness and interdependent with land, territories, and resources. Therefore, no one goes to the police or the court of the government seeking justice, as they believe that they do not provide equal justice to the people. Our tradition, culture, customary institution, self-governance system, skill, technology, and practices are very rich. Each indigenous peoples have their own customary laws, customary institution, self-governance system, and own rule and regulation who works to give justice to each nation. Division of labor in irrigation in the community, and if problem arises, headman or headwoman solve the crisis by giving justice to the victim in a very equality way. There are so many violence we have been suffering, and we have been victimized. So we need a legal system and policy also to pressure the government for the effective and meaningful implementation to address and prevent violence against indigenous women into account their specific need and cultural context also. So we indigenous peoples, indigenous women and girls want that return lands, territory and resources and its custodianship or guardianship to indigenous peoples. And also we want to stop development, aggression, militarization, colonization, globalization, and also fundamentalism, militarization, fortress model of conservation also. Because in the name of community forest, leasehold forest, religious forest, our land has been evicted. So government should formally recognize indigenous people customary government system and customary judicially administration system, including customary laws. These are meaningfully, effectively in preventing violence against women and restorative justice. Nepal government should meaningfully implement CEDAW GR number 39 on the rights of indigenous women and girls, and CEDAW concluding recommendation to Nepal government by CEDAW Committee on CEDAW and United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Nepal government should amend the existing constitution of Nepal by respecting CEDAW recommendation relating to ensure right to self-determination and all the rights of indigenous women in line with UN RIP, which the CEDAW committee has already given the recommendation to Nepal government in 2018 CEDAW shadow report on the situation of indigenous women of Nepal. And in that, the government has said, the CEDAW committee has said that amend the constitution to recognize, explicitly to recognize the rights of indigenous women in line with UN RIP. So government should develop FPIC, Free Prior Informed Consent Mechanism, and FPIC protocol and obtain APOC from the indigenous people. The government should acknowledge and integrate indigenous knowledge system and practices in decision-making process. Indigenous knowledge holder can collaborate with policymakers to develop effective plans for violence against indigenous women. The Nepal government should develop policy and program enabling indigenous women, girls to access and benefit from natural resources sustainably by designating areas within national park where indigenous people can engage in the traditional activities while ensuring biodiversity conservation, and also provide training, support, and opportunity for indigenous community to participate in ecotourism or sustainable livelihood initiative within the protected area. And government need to develop gender responsive policy that consider the intersectionality of gender and indigenous identity and support initiative that empower indigenous women and girls and indigenous women and girls with disability, providing access to resources, education, and leadership role within community resilience building program. Access to information, reasonable accommodation, meaningful participation and representation, inclusion, and disaggregated data is very important. So collectively, we can make a difference, but we As a indigenous women and girls and women with disability, we want emancipation from inequality, injustice, discrimination, criminalization, and we want gender justice, climate justice, environment justice, development justice, indigenous people justice, economic justice, to live in this world peacefully and harmonically with all the people in the world.
Remember your children, remember our future, remember your...
For more information on Indigenous rights, visit cas.org/rights and follow us on Facebook and X.
Remember your children, remember our future, remember your children, remember Mother Nature.